Good evening, students. Welcome to the lecture on developed democracies. Developed democracy. Okay, eighth lecture. Now, what is this word, developed? That means it's like a final stage you have achieved and you're not going to go move forward further. Yeah, it's a little weird. And then there's like developing democracies. Oh, yes, you're going to come and join us, and that's the final stage, kind of. They also used to describe third world countries. You heard of that? Yeah, that's a term. I even taught a course called Politics in Third World Countries. Third world? What's the third world? What's the second world then? What about first world? Right? People think the third world means it's based on economics. Developed, yes, and many other factors. But third world is a political term. First world was the countries during Cold War which were with the United States. Okay, and the second world countries were the communistic bloc, which were with the Soviet Union. And the countries in the middle, many of them, including India, were third world countries. So that's all, pretty much. So many of these third world countries now are developing countries. And some of them are developed because things have been changing fast. So you're now sitting in 2021 and looking at it. For example, South Korea was poorer than North Korea when the Korean War happened. This is after World War II, right? But now South Korea is as rich. It's very advanced technologically, progressively. That's like Japan or United States you could compare it to. They sometimes dictate to United States about free market economics, even though they started all those after the Korean War, 1950s, right? Similarly, if you look at Poland, after World War II, they were decimated by both the Russians and the Germans. And now they're more like European countries, Western European countries, right? So it's not like post-communistic country. It's all developed countries. So let's look at the developed countries as examples. If you look at, people think, oh, United States, Western Europe, that they will get. What about around the world? In Asia, already I've said South Korea and Japan, all are developed countries. And then you go down further, down means in the map, I mean Australia, New Zealand. What about in the Middle East? Israel is a developed economy and developed country. You go to Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. Yeah, okay. And so Asia, if you take Taiwan, is a developed country, far advanced in progressively, economically, technologically. What are the factors? We'll look into it. So for the first one, these countries have democratic societies, developed democracies, right? These are developed democracies. So they have liberty, freedom for the people. And they allow participation. Participation in what? Elections or referendums. We'll talk about that. We have mentioned referendum before in previous lectures, right? And competition. It's not like one guy participating in the election. Competition, fair competition. All those factors are there. So now let's talk about economically, how do you measure? So purchasing power parity, PPP, purchasing power parity. I think I've mentioned this before. It's adjusted based on what you could buy in one country. So here, a good lunch in an ordinary restaurant might cost $10 or $15. In another place, you go to India, it won't cost that much. So you have to adjust that in a purchasing power parity to adjust it to lunch. So you don't need a salary as high as in the United States, because your lunch doesn't cost much, your rent doesn't cost much. So the economists, to comparison purposes, have this measurement. So in PPP, $15,000 if you have above per capita, okay, GDP, $15,000, your country is a developed country per person, okay, PPP, purchasing power parity. And you also measure GDP, which is gross domestic product, or HDI, like Human Development Index, like the UN does. And let's look at, but there are also differences between these countries, like abortion rights. Some countries have abortion they allow for the first trimester, right? First trimester means like in the 9 months, the first 3 months, like United States, Greece, Canada, Sweden allow the abortion. And there are some countries, the limitations are strong. Like for example, South Korea, Argentina have limitations. They don't allow like freely like in the United States or other countries. And there are countries, unless until it's for exceptional reason, they will not allow abortion. Countries like Poland, which is a Catholic society, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, all these countries, unless until it's an exceptional case, abortion is not allowed. So that's for abortion, point one. Write down point two. So you will remember, for exam to study referendums. We talked about referendums. Like in the US and in Germany also, you cannot have a national referendum. It's not in the constitution, but in state levels, you could have referendums. I don't need to explain to you what referendum is. You already know, right? And also you should know what initiative is, right? People put that rather than the state putting it. But in Japan, there's no referendum. There's no referendum, and it's a functioning democracy. Okay? So they vary. The developed countries vary. That's what we are trying to talk. Abortion, it varies. So this is a referendum, they vary. Electoral system. Most of the world is a PR system. PR is what? Proportional representation. And in some countries, it's mixed. Mixed of what? Mixed of single member district and proportional representation. Like, Germany and Japan, right? In Japan is like a 60-40. But also Mexico, Hungary, Italy, write down these countries, are mixing the two systems. Whereas like if you take single member districts, the UK, the France, the Canada, the US, all these are like single member district, winner takes all. So even among developed countries, developed democracies, I should say, there is a difference. There's a difference in the system of electoral system. What about the fourth point? Money, like contributions to political campaigns. Some countries have limitations how much money you could spend in political contributions. Okay, very strict. Like in the UK, it's nothing compared to the United States. Yes, we have limitations here in the United States. And United States, you take my class in American government, we talk about different levels of government have different types. In the New York City, you could get compensated for every dollar you raise from people, $8 the city gives you. Whereas the federal government doesn't. You have to raise all the money. And then there's super PACs and other things which gives you right to raise unlimited amount of money. But there are countries which limit campaign donations. In American elections, it's like $4 billion affair for federal government. I'm talking about Congress, Senate, and presidential elections put together. That's a $4 billion for just election campaign spending. That's a large amount of money. Okay? And so now the fifth point, executive branch. We talked about it. Countries like, just like the PR system, electoral system, most of the developed democracies have PM. This is what England has. Like PM is the prime minister system, so it's parliamentarian system. But there are countries which are more presidential, our presidential system, like the United States. And we talked about Chile and Brazil, Mexico, all these countries. Okay? And what about semi-presidential system? We talked about Russia, France, Korea, are a semi-presidential system. So not only these 5 points, there's a sixth point that life expectancy varies in these countries. Even though they are all developed democracies, did they reach the top? And that's the epidemic. No, 70 life expectancy in some countries. Some countries it's over 80, like Sweden, Japan, right? India, if you take, for example, it's a developing country, it's like 68. At least the last time I saw, it might have increased a little bit or gone down, hope not. 68, right? It's almost 82 in Netherlands. It's 14 years difference for male, and female live a little longer than male. Yeah, guys, don't jump and do any tactics for an Instagram. That's one. Men kill themselves in many ways. We don't want to talk about that. In Russia, men suicides are high. So there are differences among developed democracies, and that's the point. And I also wanted to talk about European Union. What is this European Union? When you talk about developed democracies, you talk about, and it's an idea created after World War II. Why after World War II? Because World War II created this conflict between France, Germany. It started with Germany rolling into, well, they rolled into Poland, and then they wanted to occupy Germany as well, right? And France as well. And even in World War I, they came. So France wanted to create, there's a guy named John, Jean, Monnet, Monnet. You could look him up. He's called Father of Europe. He created this idea of European Union, and this idea is like to bring states together so they could work together on common interest, so that will prevent future wars. World War I, World War II, 15 million casualties around the world. So it's human lives lost, destruction. So he first, the French wanted to have the British. The British applied for 10 years later after this idea, 1951. So 61. And then the French didn't want the British in there. And then they allowed them at 1973. And so they started one by one, more and more countries joined. Some countries said, no, we're not interested in the European Union. Even countries like Sweden didn't join in the beginning. But they wanted, the idea later is to create many of the states together, like a United States of Europe. Yeah, the inspiration from United States. Why? Because United States was just 13 colonies, 13 states. If they haven't joined together, they wouldn't have this enormous power, right? And so then in 2000, the European Union also created the idea of currency, common currency. Isn't it interesting? This is expansion of not only bringing all them together, now the common currency. The common currency idea, it's also like United States. If you look at it, even after United States came together, each state had different currencies. Did you know that? Like Tennessee will have a different currency than Kentucky, or you go, it's all changed after Civil War, 1861-65. Okay, the Civil War happened in the United States. Before that, if you go, they look at the state currency. You will look in the store and they will see the transactional charge, just like a foreign currency you're using to taking American dollar and buying in Singapore things, and they will give you change in Singapore currency, how much it's equivalent, all this, foreign exchange, right? So this idea of bringing European Union, a monetary currency, which is common for all these countries, is a big deal, but it created problems. What kind of problems? We're going to talk about it, the problems of European Union, right? And the critics said this European Union is a problem because of immigration. First, immigration is because when you are all these countries together, okay, if you accept, so there's 13 colonies, anyone, like say, for example, now, New York, I could move to Maryland and live there. I don't need to ask anybody. And similarly, in Europe, one country to another, people move. They move to prosperous countries. And people, say in England, as particularly, let's use that as an example here, because of Brexit, you have heard of that word, felt their national culture is changing. Their national political culture is changing. And national identity is changing. Immigration is also affecting jobs due to globalization. You know what a globalization is? We will talk about globalization for a whole class about in the 2 more classes later. But for now, globalization is the integration of markets, integration of economies through markets across borders. It's a simple definition used by a scholar, who wrote a book, Why Globalization Works, Martin Wolf, economist, magazine's associate editor. So it's integration of economies through markets across borders. It's globalization. So then globalization and people movement, immigration created job loss, and these people were angry. And so politicians, when there is anger, they're going to come and tap into it to win votes. So there's a party called UKIP, UK, the country, an independent party. UK Independent Party is led by this guy named Nigel Farage. Nigel, you know how to spell it, Nigel, Farage, Farage. And in 1993, he started the party, and in 2014, at the beginning, it was a fringe group. It was not in the mainstream politics. By 2014, 28%, they won in the election of 2014. They won the first place. And in June 2016, they pushed for Brexit. 2020, England was out. People voted in the referendum, and 52% voted to get out. And most of them who voted, if you see, are the ones who are not college educated, who are older, and who feel they are left out in the race of economic growth because of globalization and immigration. They feel the identity of United Kingdom is changing because people are just coming into their country. From what? From Italy to any parts of southern parts of Europe, anyone who is part of the European Union, because European Union started joining more and more and more countries. I mean, they started including about like 13 countries in from 2004 to 2010. You understand? The communistic bloc countries, they were part of Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union disintegrated into multiple countries in the 1990s, early 1990s. 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. 1991, when they disintegrated, they started slowly moving towards the interest of European Union because of economic opportunities for their people. And then they will start moving to these prosperous states. So people in the prosperous states like UK or France started feeling the pain of people from outside coming and taking jobs. And it's not just in the UK, even in France, okay, there's a party called National Front. And in 2014, it secured 25%. So it's a conservative party where they secured. And there was a very famous popular book I read, Europe, how it's changing because of Islam. And there's another book which is titled Londonistan, like Pakistan, Muslim countries with the stan, it ends. Londonistan, how Muslims are migrating and how the culture is changing. And there's a backlash from these societies. Are you following? Yeah. So now let's talk about further the idea of European Union further. Okay, European Union. What is that? What does it have? What are the institutions of the European Union? Write it down. European Union institutions. So the European Union has a president. He is elected for 2.5 years, but not elected by the EU public. Yes, like the president of the United States, he's elected overwhelmingly by the people, right? Before there was Electoral College, the American founding fathers didn't think the people are wise enough to vote and elect a president. So it's usually by the electors, higher standing members in the society, right? And so that is not democratic. Yes, I know. Even the US senators were not elected by the people. It was only this House of Representatives in the United States were elected by the people. So more and more countries become democratic. They give those US senators, presidents were elected by the people. And the country, European Union, a modern 21st century, okay, it started in the mid-20th century, but 21st century existing institutions, electing a European Union president for 2.5 years, not by the public. Then who? What are the other institutions part of it? Write it down. European Council. You could write it down as first one, European Council. That is filled with head of states. Each head of states, you know what a head of state is and head of government is. We have described that earlier. Head of state of each European Union state is part of the European Council. Okay? And then European Commission. If you write down European Commission, there's about 27 members, one member per state. Okay? And this European Commission decides on transportation, and each member is especially in charge of transportation, environment, energy, and all this. And then the third institution is European Parliament. Now, these European Parliament, there are 705 members, and they are all elected by the people from each state. Each state, which are member to the European Union, elects these people for 5-year terms. And you might say, like, is it small state? Will, like Belgium, would have the same number of representation as, say, England? No, England would have way more when it was part of it because of the population. So it's based on the population, just like the House of Representatives in the United States. It's based on the population of a state. California has the most number of House of Representatives compared to Rhode Island or even Wyoming, just one, right? You know that. And New York and Florida has very similar number. So depending on the population, the House of Representatives is similar representatives, but the total number is 705 members based on the European Union. By the way, European Union is like 500 million people. Yes, it's more than that of the United States of America, which is about 325 million people, right? What's the role of this European Union Parliament? They pass legislation. No kidding. They get the right to pass legislation, laws of European Union. Yes, that's why they're elected. They pass laws that the proposal, the Commission proposed, European Union Commission proposes bills to pass into laws. Okay, and remember the Commission is 27 members, right? One from each state, right? And these members propose, the Commission propose, and then the Parliament passes the laws. And these laws are applied in European Union. So it could be a law about a regulation, like what? Well, we should be not allowing products, a particular product. I'm going to make up. Say a particular pill shouldn't be coming into European Union, any of these countries from outside. They could pass a law. What if that law is different from the laws created by the states? Because the states have parliament, like UK has a parliament, right? And Reichstag in Germany. What if they have a law? Here's the kicker. The European Union Parliament law supersedes the laws of the state. So the critics feel like it is violating their sovereignty. Hey, how dare people from Belgium sitting there in the parliament and supporting a law? That law will have an impact in UK. You following? Or in France. And so they will feel mad. Okay. I'm talking about the critics. Not everybody is going to criticize it. And so write down the fourth institution. It's EU Court of Justice. Court of Justice. When I say Court of Justice, it's just like the Supreme Court, say, for example. And it has one judge per state who was the member of the European Union. What do? They pass EU laws. They look at the laws, they apply those laws, not pass laws. Legislation is done by the legislature. They apply the laws to the problems in front of them. And so if there's a butting head of EU laws versus laws of the state, who is resolving it? The EU Court of Justice. And they will say, oh, the laws of the state is, the EU law supersedes the law of the state. And they will strike it down. Yeah. So EU is a supranational system, supranational, not intergovernmental. intergovernmental is the UN is an intergovernmental institution, United Nations, where this is supranational means it's a higher sovereign body which brings all this together. So it's like here in the United States, if I had to say, Constitution, U.S. Constitution clearly says the laws created by Congress supersedes the laws of the state. It's called supremacy clause, by the way, supremacy clause. And because that institution, if they butt head, two different laws, federal law stands. Okay, it's like bringing the countries, they modeling after the European United States of America. They want to create a United States of Europe, but they face challenges. They face challenges. Like what? First one, write it down. The first challenge is like monetary, bringing monetary union. Okay, that is creating a common currency like EU currency. What's the problem? Like when they create a common currency for all, okay, so some of the states which had their own central bank, you know what a central bank, we talked about it in when we talked about inflation, deflation, how the central bank deals with it, inflation, hyperinflation, all those things, right? Monetary policy, yes. So these individual countries which have central bank will not be as, they will be accountable to the European Union banks. Now, poor countries, especially when European currency is introduced, their interest rates went down. When interest rates went down, their debts went up. Both governmental and private debts went up. That is the country's debt to the European Union. And Greece was one of those countries. And so they were struggling already. And when 2008 housing crisis, that happened in America, it happened around the world, the economic crisis, it took down Greece. Now, you might ask, what did the other states do? Did they support, fund? That's when problem. They didn't want to. See, for example, here, New York State pays into the federal system more than it takes, whereas states in South, some of them get more benefit from federal than the taxes the citizens of the state pay. But we can't complain. We are part of the union. Whereas Germans feel like, why do I need to pay for Greece? These people in Greece are lazy. Some critics felt like they have so much time, vacation, and like Italy, for example, siesta, they take a lot of time and work schedule is different, whereas we are working. Remember the Protestant work ethic? This is the northern states have Protestant religion. Southern states of the Europe, southern states have Catholic. And so we don't need to work hard to fund their laziness. Was criticism. And so the problem of monetary created a problem. And then the second problem, write it down, is created a problem with the Union of European Union. The second problem is many, I already mentioned, post-communistic countries after the dismemberment of Soviet Union started joining, like 6 to 15 states first in the beginning. But 13 states joined from 2004 to 2013. That's extra 100 million people. Extra 100 million people. That brought European Union population to 500 million people. So more people started moving into the richer, not only to work, but to live and have a better life standards in countries. And these people in the local feel like they're competing against these aliens coming from other countries. So they feel angry. And third important point, the European Union is mostly managed by bureaucrats. As the more bureaucrats started managing it, it becomes anti-democratic because it doesn't feel like it's responsible to its people. And so many critics wanted devolution. Remember the word D-E? Just put a D in front of evolution. Devolution is what? Getting the power closer to the people. So not like supranational system of powers going out, rather coming in to the system. And so smaller, closer to the people, even to cities and municipal, rather than in the federal central power. And so the trust also is lesser for people, even if in the United States, trust for federal government is lesser. And trust for state governments is okay. Trust for municipal or local governments is much higher than the federal, you see, because you could see your electoral official, you could talk, but this federal you can't go and see a congressman or a U.S. senator. Most don't even know who their U.S. senator is. That's a different story. So they want local power. And so the Brexit, which is the exit of Britain from the European Union, they felt that it will help them to keep their borders safe from people coming from outside. Second point, write down, is to help them in globalization. Yes. And then third point, to help their political culture. Fourth one, to keep their sovereignty. So European Union doesn't create a law that will supersede theirs. You following? So they feel that way, but not everybody. The young people don't feel that way. It's mostly the older people, and I already said people who feel their jobs are lost because of globalization, like manufacturing jobs are gone to third world countries. And so they cannot just go and get a college degree or a higher degree or new job training, because it's harder as you get older. To learn becomes harder. Okay, you have to empathize with them as well and understand, rather than like, why don't they change? No, if you're younger, you might think, oh, why don't they change? It's not easy. And so politicians channel their anger very well and get votes. You might see, oh, that's very common in America. Yes, it's the same thing around developed democracies. So democracies have this problem to balance equality versus freedom. Okay, you know this. Again, going back to the CISA, it is the problem of how democracies struggle to balance freedom versus equality. But developed democracies usually prefer, because they are giving the power to the private property and market and limited government involvement. So it's liberal economies. And it creates a good quality of life overall. But of course, it creates inequality. We talked about inequality, Gini coefficient index. And like, for example, the top 3 guys in the US have more money than the bottom 50%. That is byproduct of lesser government involvement in transfer of wealth. Okay. And of course, it varies. Developed democracies like Sweden, Norway taxes more. And so it could create a little more better equality than UK or United States. Now, these are the points. Study it and watch the documentary, okay, on the European Union. And I'm looking forward to your points and reading it. Good luck.